Greetings and salutations, fellow travellers in the moral multiverse. I'm the ludicrous superhero, Doctor Multiverse, whose not-so-secret identity is Dr. Chris Bateman, game designer and renegade philosopher, fighting for truth, justice and virtuous discourse in a world gone mad. You've probably come across this before, the trolley problem, the infamous moral dilemma originally proposed by the virtue ethicist Philipa Foot. Trolley means tram or streetcar, and the basic form of the trolley problem goes something like this. An out-of-control trolley is rushing down a track towards 5 workers. You can flip a switch to divert the trolley down a different track with a single workman, should you flip the switch. Another famous variant on this theme was proposed by Judith Jarvis Thompson. You are standing on a footbridge and see below an out-of-control trolley rushing towards 5 workers directly in its path. Also on the footbridge with you is a fat man, and if you push him off, he will bring the trolley to a stop but will die in the process. Should you push the fat man? Now I'm sure you all have your own takes on these two thought experiments. Yet whichever answers you take up, I contend you will have made a catastrophic error in your moral thinking if you do anything other than challenging the very premises upon which these thought experiments operate. There is a fantastic essay by Alan Wood in Derek Parfit's monumental On What Matters that bears directly upon this issue. Parfit's philosophy frequently relies upon thought experiments very similar to trolley and footbridge, and Wood sets about savaging all such ways of thinking about moral problems. Wood notes that trolley problems deprive us of important, morally relevant facts that we generally would have if the thought experiment were actually happening to us. They thus encourage us to ignore moral principles because they've been stipulated away. They distort the complexity of real situations by specifying our certainty on matters that we could not possibly be certain about in practice, thus inviting conclusions that follow from the premises of the thought experiment, but which could never be decisive if we actually faced such a situation. As Wood points out, the kind of transport systems we're talking about are either the responsibility of public agencies or are run by private companies that are regulated with a view towards public safety and the prevention of loss of life. It would be considered a scandal if the lives of workers were endangered at all while working on the lines, and the question of 5 lives or 1 would never enter into the relevant moral deliberation at all. The kind of fictional situations that the trolley problems ask us to ponder can be imagined, but they are not really conceivable in practice. They are absurd comic book fantasy conundrums, entirely removed from life as we actually live it. Ironically, neither Thompson nor Foot believe that these problems must be decided on the basis of number of lives lost. But there are consequentialist moral philosophers who do make this kind of claim, and perhaps more worryingly, there are influential people in our world making decisions on precisely this kind of logic. I'd like to read from an important paper written in 1958 by Wittgenstein's exceptional student Elizabeth Anscombe, from whom the name consequentialism originates. The point of considering hypothetical situations, perhaps very improbable ones, seems to be to elicit from yourself or someone else a hypothetical decision to do something of a bad kind. I don't doubt this has the effect of predisposing people who will never get into the situations for which they have made the hypothetical choice to consent to similar bad actions or to praise and flatter those who do them, so long as their crowd does so too, when the desperate circumstances imagined don't hold at all. The grail of moral certitude that mathematics seems to hold out for ethics is a dangerous mirage. Perhaps the most common objection to this kind of moral cost-benefit analysis is the accusatory adage, the ends justify the means, which carries with it the implication that the ends should not justify the means. Unfortunately, this claim is nonsense. As Wood points out, the meaning of the word means is precisely whatever is used to achieve an end. So it's always the case that the ends justify the means. The problem we want to single out is that having a worthy end doesn't justify any and all means. we should consider revising this complaint to say that the goodness of ends cannot justify the immorality of means. Consequentialist approaches to ethics that attempt mathematical solutions to moral problems circumvent moral discourse rather than enriching it. Toby Ord suggests no consequentialist ethicist actually expects morality to be attained by naive calculation, and that's a somewhat encouraging admission. Yet within both governments and corporations, these kinds of calculations remain the key method by which major decisions are justified. Despite there being no plausible way to calculate what is good, not to mention no consensus as to what even qualifies as good, political decisions revolve primarily around whatever can be quantified in a suitably mathematical form, with the two most common metrics being money and lives. It is grotesque to try to equate money and lives as if these measures were somehow equivalent. But it's equally reprehensible to reduce a complex real-world situation to a strict comparison of lives lost, as the trolley problems do. And this is also what the computer simulations of the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic produced by Imperial College London also attempted. There is a role for computer modelling in the sciences, but such models are not a replacement for empirical work. They are speculative until proven accurate, and they are never a substitute for a considered judgment reached through open debate. Reducing complex interventions such as long-term lockdowns to a mere mathematical calculation entails all the distortive trickery of trolley problems. Since these epidemiological computer models have thus far failed to make any accurate predictions whatsoever, treating them as a miraculous oracle is far worse than relying upon trolley problems. At least the trolley problems are purely imaginary scenarios. What we have done over the last 18 months is not at all imagined. It is a medical disaster wrought by treating a computer program as if it possessed prophetic powers, a horrifically naive abandonment of scientific investigation for digital superstition. We needed to make informed decisions about the best ways to deal with the pandemic without inflicting further harms through disruptions of our medical support networks. Instead, we dodged our responsibilities and let ourselves be hoodwinked by a computer-generated trolley problem. Let's set aside for now the question of whether long-term lockdowns in the United States or Europe saved more lives than they will have cost in disruption to oncology, obstetrics and A&E, domestic violence, sepsis, depression and suicide. The prohibition on open debate on these topics makes it exceptionally hard to determine the true situation on any of these issues right now. Besides, worse than this ambiguity, far worse, the true catastrophe of lockdowns is not in the wealthy countries at all. The middle classes of the global north could afford to accept being imprisoned in their own homes. Indeed, they benefited from finally being able to overturn the ludicrous objection of their employers that working from home was an impossibility. Maybe locking down saved middle-class lives on aggregate, I really don't know. But either way, it is the impact of these fanatically pursued policies upon Africa and Southern Asia that stand out as the most monstrous injustice. For in places where poverty is rife, expecting people to lock down is asking them to starve to death. In Senegal, to give just one example, the imposition of lockdowns has achieved nothing except plunging the citizens of that great country even further into poverty while lining the pockets of the corrupt. As Mamadou Ndiaye laments, there's no democracy in Senegal anymore, even though Senegal was always singled out before as a strong African democracy. If you are one of them, you can do what you want. There's no justice. It's only in Africa that you can find a state official making millions. Meanwhile, the New York Times and other trusted news providers run stories about the Paris-Dakar rally or the shortage of COVID-19 vaccines in Senegal without ever once questioning whether such vaccines are what the Senegalese actually need. Let me make this as clear as I can. Up until autumn 2021, Senegal had lost 1,855 of its good people to COVID-19. Every year in Senegal, roughly 9,000 people, 5 times as many, die from unsafe drinking water. Nearly 17,000 people, 9 times as many, die from causes related to air pollution. And some 22,000 children under the age of 5, 12 times as many, die from preventable pneumonia. We are somehow required to see Senegal as a country of interest only in connection with COVID-19 vaccination or motorsports. What an outrageous distortion of what matters. This obsession with one specific cause of death is not only logically insane when it comes to nations like Senegal, but through the pointless imposition of lockdowns that its people could not possibly afford to pursue, we have inadvertently shattered one of the few democracies in Africa. We live in countries where people are lucky enough to live to be over 80 and thus die of respiratory infections in their sunset years rather than dying from preventable pneumonia under the age of 5, like those 22,000 black children who die in Senegal every year. Millions of poor children around the world die like this, as much from poverty as from the pneumonia that actually ends their lives. If the goodness of ends cannot justify the immorality of means, we should be especially wary of situations such as this one, whereby suffering is unleashed on a global scale by a kind of mathematical idolatry. We cannot calculate what is good any more than we can produce a number to meaningfully evaluate a tragedy, and we should be wary of all attempts to reduce morality to mere mathematics. The numbers of people that have tragically died of any cause of death are not the true face of any humanitarian disaster. They're just a grisly shorthand for summarising the horror of it all. Over the last year, I've heard people say, if it saves just one life, it's worthwhile. I can appreciate the good intentions of that maxim, but it is naive if it does not also mean if just one life is lost, it is not worthwhile. Millions of innocent lives are lost every day around the world from poverty and neglect. And over the last 18 months, we have inadvertently inflicted monumental tragedies upon numerous other nations for which we are all partially responsible. We turned fighting a disease into a crusade where all who question the logic of what we are doing must be denounced. We gladly march to declare that Black Lives Matter, all while we show by neglect that we do not believe Black Lives Matter at all if they live in Africa. I am ashamed, deeply ashamed by what we've allowed to happen. We have thrown Africa under the trolley while we squabble about face masks, vaccines and gender metaphysics. We joke about first world problems. The truth is we are the problem, all of us. As long as we reduce every problem to numbers and selectively count which deaths matter, well, every death matters and every cause of death matters. Until we accept this, until we stop gerrymandering who and what is allowed to count, we have abandoned everything the Enlightenment stood for and supplanted the complexity of our moral problems with the disastrous convenience of mere calculation.